Click the links, join my channel here over at SubScribes are now over at Odyssey. So that Park Place's John Trent covers Rings of Power, where she says she wants us to embrace our differences. No, I think we're going to have to pass on that. So season 2 of Amazon's Rings of Power starts tomorrow, and I will be reluctantly watching at least the first 3 episodes to just give it some kind of a fair shot. I like bad shows up to a point, and then sometimes secondhand embarrassment kicks into gear. I think there's probably going to be some brownies to help me get through tomorrow's video. So the lead girl, in this case, at least a Euro elf, but unfortunately a vagina power girl boss type of magic, Mary Sue character who's a little bit insufferable. So she gives this interview, and she's telling you how she sees Lord of the Rings, and essentially why Amazon made it, and why they didn't just do what Peter Jackson did in 2000 with Lord of the Rings. They go, oh, he did an interview with the other assistant producers and directors and whatnot. He goes, we just are trying to honor Tolkien's original vision as much as possible. Oh, that sounds perfectly reasonable. Why doesn't everyone do that? Well, I mean, you'd have to ask Amazon, which is famous for artificial intelligence and shipping packages, not so much their creative branch. So to her, they're not making. Look, she got a little criticism. Welcome to the effing internet. She does this interview, and she's telling you how she sees Lord of the Rings, and to her, they're not making Lord of the Rings to tell the story of continuation or the prequel to whatever, the Silmarillion, because there are no Afro elves or Afro hobbits in Lord of the Rings. It's based on European folklore. And the interview with the main elf, the black elf guy, the hubris is insane. But, you know, for a lot of these people, it's like, we already got paid for 5 seasons. The check cleared. We're just showing up and making these shows. It doesn't matter if anyone watches them. And to be fair, even though it might have cost $800 million to get the rights to this and the production of this, that doesn't matter to Amazon. That's how much money Amazon has, where that kind of money, even if it does nothing but lose money, it just doesn't even affect them. So they're using it as a vehicle because it's got the name recognition of Lord of the Rings, the best-known fantasy trilogy on Earth, I think, to push globalist propaganda to brainwash the cattle into accepting their sacred folk stories being destroyed and calling you racist if you mention that they don't do this to any other group, any of the various black tribes, or black in general, or Arabs, or Jews, or Chinese, or whatever. They only do it to European people who they consider gods that they want to destroy. And I only say that because that's really what it feels like a cargo cult who's trying to destroy something they don't understand, to try to tear it down. So she says that this is her daughter's generation of Lord of the Rings. Yeah, that's the point. That's the problem, because it's not Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is the books, which keep going around my neighborhood. The book kiosks that they started during the Wu flu. This is Hollywood's until at least they probably release a revised, edited version of the books for a modern audience. They do that to some books. Who's that guy that? Oh God, forget that guy, that artist. They do that to some books as well, where they've been around for so long. And Lord of the Rings is, one day you're probably going to see a cover of one of the books, and it's going to have Afro hobbits and Afro elves on it, and it'll be like a special edition. And it's what happened to not one word changed or omitted that you used to see at the front of books. Anyway, this is not Lord of the Rings, because that's found in the books. This is Hollywood's predictive programming, chaos, magic, Frankfurt School, poison. And to be fair, it's not her daughter's Lord of the Rings, because just not a whole lot of people are going to see it. It's kind of one of those things that more reviewers are going to see it than anyone else. But that was the intent. That this was it's just the propaganda was so heavy-handed that it pushed away the viewer. If you haven't seen a few episodes, you can find it online. So you got like a black queen over here, and then an Indian queen over here with a bunch of Pacific Islanders and Asians. It just looks like you went down a checklist, but they're all one people living in a kingdom, all living together. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, but you're a bigot, so just accept it. Oh, okay, but I mean, but people didn't accept it because it got very low watch hours, and it got a very low, like 37% of people watched the whole thing all the way to the last episode, which I guess for these sorts of things is low. But it has to be an awakening if you're some kid who you're watching this Amazon monkeypox and AIDS version of Lord of the Rings, and then a couple years later you get a hold of the books and you go read the books, and then suddenly it hits you. You're like, you're going to have your own They Live moment, because what are they doing in that? That is such a great movie. Honestly, it's something that should just be watched every year. What are they doing in that church over there? You would understand that there was something else going on, that you'd been lied to, and it would start your journey down the rabbit hole, which is, the time to start that was yesterday. And part of being a far right extremist Hugo Boss, you mean wanting the original story, or telling kids they shouldn't sterilize themselves? Yeah, that's what the Nazis wanted. Is looking at this kind of propaganda and seeing it for what it is and asking, why is this happening, and who's pulling the strings on this? Why are these parasites trying to erase and rewrite history? Who's Jeff Bezos? This guy who runs Amazon. I'm sure he has nothing to do with this, but the thing is, if you don't accept and there are the two people who work on this, they just absolute soy people. If you don't accept these lies, then you're a wrong thinker, and that makes them very nervous and afraid that you might awaken the other cattle, which is, it's upon us all to do that. And so she goes through and she just, like, these people are such in a deep echo chamber. They really have no concept of the outside world. They something that's somebody I was doing this research on this guy, consensus reality is a kind of a left-wing thing, which means they're so deep in an echo chamber that the version of reality they all agree on is real, and then they have this cognitive dissonance when you intrude with facts, because you can ignore things but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring things. That's why so many left-wing policies are just, they talk about blue cities, and you look at them, it's like it's a dystopian nightmare, because they believe so many things that are just not so. So she says one of these bullshit phrases that are meaningless. It's something like, we need to embrace and love our differences. But actually stop to break these statements down, because our differences, Tolkien's story is what it is, a love letter to the European people. It makes sense because it has an English village setting. That is part of our differences. As different as it would be to an African or a Chinese story. This is actually serendipitous right here. It kind of looks like almost like a video game. These people don't belong together in stories, and if they are together in a story, you have to explain why they're together. Oh, you know what I remember from the first season, which is now a year old? They have these are husband and wife in this show, and they're sitting at a dinner table, and they have the two kids. But for some reason, the kids are wearing helmets the whole time, so you don't get to see what the kids look like. And I wonder if that's because they're mixed, that they didn't want to show you that this Euro dwarf is erasing, his history to create this new thing. And it's like, so you got these dwarves, and they're all these different races, but they live together, and they're kind of isolated because they don't breed with, outside of dwarves. But like, clearly you have one who's darker than the other, and they're obviously from different environmental, stressors. So how does that fit in the story? You're just a bigot for asking. Yeah. But how does it make sense in the story? Well, it doesn't. It's just woke propaganda. The story is from and downstream from the race of people that make the story special and unique. And this is not in her folklore. It's not in her environment. None of this is. It is somewhat in his, because it literally came out of Tolkien's story. Embracing our differences means respecting boundaries. Different things are special because of their differences. If you replace the European people with nons, it's not special anymore, and it's not distinctly European. It's just more globalist predictive programming. An English village setting, Lord of the Rings, is ridiculous when you have people who are trying to play the roles of European people, but they're not European people. Why wouldn't you just use European people? Why would you tell the Shaka Zulu story with French people as part of the Zulu tribe? No, because that would be insane. It would look as silly as it does here. It's the biggest critical failure of the story. There's no point in going beyond it and trying to examine other elements of the story. It's like if you had clowns running around Hobbitville and asking us to just, well, you have to accept clown diversity for the sake of enrichment. Like, no, we don't, because we know diversity is cancer. The people of Europe that the story was based on already are diverse. They don't need people from thousands of miles away who visually look like they don't belong because they weren't what the original artist envisioned. If you want to tell some new story with black and Asian and whatever, why don't you just tell a new story? Oh, because that would just be ridiculous. All these different people coming together in some fantasy setting based on, European mythology. It's like it didn't happen. It was never. That's why, yes, of course, that's why Tolkien didn't write it that way, because it doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make any more sense now when you use bait and switch, but now you get to use the name recognition of Lord of the Rings, which was, 3 very big movies and obviously even bigger books. So she says she got criticized for things that other people felt liberated by. It's like way to manipulate people's emotions there, except that the criticism is because you're using the name of Lord of the Rings, but you didn't make Lord of the Rings. You made Amazon's globalist propaganda. You're wrong, and the critics are correct. And there's just none of this makes sense. Why do you have a black guy leading the 3? He's a hobbit, and you have the 3 Euro hobbits. They're not together. That doesn't make sense. If they were together over many generations, they would all look the same. They did this in that Stephen King movie, Stephen King books. There's 7 books that make The Dark Tower, and they compressed it into one movie. And instead of using a Clint Eastwood character, which fit the role, they used some black guy to play the role. None of that made sense. The thing is, there's so much wrong with this with this abomination that her girl boss portrayal is kind of just icing on the cake. So they said the show is making it accessible for future generations, but that's a nonsense statement because Rings of Power isn't Lord of the Rings. It's nothing. The books and original movies are accessible to anyone who wants to read them. They were hugely successful, and Rings of Power is not successful. And I'm sure the second season's not going to be any better. So your logic of making things accessible doesn't make sense. But it's like this stuff is not designed to make sense because they're not expecting anyone to ask questions. Because if you do, well, it's like, oh, well, you're just istophobic. Yeah, but that's not yes or no. That's not relevant either way to the argument of this isn't Lord of the Rings. The original is accessible because it was in the past. It was hugely successful. What was so great was the original story is that we're still talking about it. That's how successful it was, and it's distinctly European. That's what people liked about it. It's one of the pieces that went into the puzzle that makes a great story. It's weird that respecting people's culture includes everyone but European peoples. If you have to race swap characters to understand the story, then it's not for you. Why would suddenly people today need blacks and Chinese and Indians in the story for it to be accessible when the original was, pure fictional characters, but they're based on a European village, and the original movies were characters that all look like they belong together, and it was massively successful. And people dove in. People watched the movies and then went back and read the books. So this is great. It was accessible. Why would it not be accessible? And it only makes sense because it's based on European mythology. Like even the smelting metals to manufacture these kind of things is like this was a European thing that they did. I don't think Africans ever did this. None of this makes sense. Even like the gods they worship are from European mythology. And it's like, oh, we'll we'll just substitute a non-Europe. That doesn't make sense. It's important to us, and and they know they're trying to say it's not important. Nothing matters. It's like, well, if it doesn't matter, if it didn't matter, then you wouldn't race swap it. It clearly matters to you because this guy just doesn't look like he belongs. These are the tribe of elves and humans and dwarves and hobbits. This is what Tolkien envisioned, and then you put this in there, and you're like, oh, this is, you just like, even the I don't know what, the sun wheel. None of this makes sense. That people aren't fungible, but to be a Bolshevik means that people have to be fungible. What they're doing is they're just erasing people in the story and replacing them with people who are not in the story. So kids will think that this is how European folklore always was. It always had non-Europeans. In fact, they're the best part. The non-Europeans are able to tell the European folklore even better than the European people. So would some Irish people be able to tell some African or Chinese story? That would be ridiculous. But for some reason, Hollywood has predictively programmed people to accept this, but then suddenly when you reverse it, they go, oh, well, that's appropriation. Yeah, well, either it all is or none of it is. And the thing is, this stuff doesn't withstand any cross-examination, any scrutiny, because like a child could look through this and go, this logically doesn't make sense. Why are you doing this? And in fact, even weirder, it's like, why are you putting $700 million into doing something that almost certainly will fail? It's like, that's the deeper question. Anyway, so they want kids to think that this is kids. TV, the power of TV brainwashing is insane. And when they tell the folklore of the Nons, they don't include Europeans. So if you're erasing Europeans from their own stories and you're not including them in other stories, which, don't get me wrong, would be just as fucking asinine, you're just erasing European people from history, which is actually a stage of genocide. So it's concerning. And then hey, get on social media and virtue signal over, you took the story, you turned it into propaganda, and now you're virtue signaling about the people who are criticizing it and calling them istophobic because BIPOC, Middle Earth is all European people. No, BIPOC people don't belong in Middle Earth. J.R. Tolkien creates a world which by definition is multicultural. Yes, the cultures of Europe. There's many countries in Europe. They're all multicultural, ethnic, there's already diversity just in Europe. In fact, European people are the most diverse people on Earth if you're looking at just physical morphology with hair, eye, and skin shades. The rest of the world are not the people of color. When you get the people of color who've got eye color and hair color that cross the spectrum and is commonly seen. A world in which free people from different races and cultures join together in a fellowship. Well, was that in the original book? Yes, it was, but it was still based on European people. Our world has never been all white. Well, there's the big lie. Fantasy has never been all white. Well, that doesn't relate to this. Fantasy, this Tolkien story is all white because it's all European. It's all based on his experience in Europe, in a small English village growing up. So that our world has never been all white. Well, you're talking about like the world in general has not been all white. It's like, okay, that's a true statement. Middle Earth is not all white. Well, that's not a true statement. There were characters who were coded, I guess, to be Middle Easterners who were part of Saruman's army, I think. But he's being very ambiguous with this statement. BIPOCs belong in Middle Earth and they're here to stay. It's like you haven't actually said anything concrete. You're just saying what feels good. Anyway, this is we see you, your bravery and endless creativity. They talk like, you know what, and their ass is all developmentally disabled. None of this makes sense. I hope it bombs, and I'll be here to watch some of it bomb tomorrow night. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys all next episode. Yes? No? Or did I break it?